In this episode, we're going to be covering a little bit more complex systems called blueprint interfaces and how to set them up for things like setting up a button system for unlocking a door or making a platform move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in the case of a moving platform and have it when you press a button, it starts to activate that platform, otherwise it won't do anything. So first of all, I've got rid of the moving platform that I covered in the last episode. And what we're going to do is duplicate the existing one, and I'm going to rename that to the same thing but locked at the end. And then what we want to do is open that blueprint up, open up the timeline, and take off autoplay. What that'll do is it won't play it by default, and it'll only play it when we do the custom event of maybe let's call it play, and then it will play the animation from there. So this custom event can now be referenced somewhere with the custom event, but it won't do anything until this is triggered. So what we then want to do is set up a parent class of interactable things. So I'm going to call this, make an actor BP underscore interact. And then that's going to be the parent that we add all the different things like buttons and levers and things like that. Anything that the player can interact with, we want in there. And then we want to add a blueprint interface. So right click anywhere blank, mouse over blueprint here, and we'll make a blueprint interface. And we're going to call that BPI for BP blueprint interface. And then we're going to call this interact. And then if we open that up, we've got this function here. So by default, you can rename this. I'm just going to call this interact. And that's set up there. What a blueprint interface allows us to do is communicate to different blueprints without needing to reference them. It can get a bit messy if you have to reference every single blueprint, so blueprint interfaces make it a little bit more simpler. So what we want to do is we want to add this interface to these blueprints. So the BP interact, we want to add an interface. So click on the class settings at the top, and then on the right at the bottom you should say implemented interfaces. And if we get the BPI underscore interact, it will then add that there. So what we can then do is if we right click and do interact and we do event interact, this will then trigger once the interact sort of interface has been triggered by something else, and it'll flow to this. So we can test that by doing print string, and it should say hello once we've set it all up and done everything. So what we then want to do is go to the player. So in here, we want to add that interface so that we can trigger it there. I don't know what that error was. Oh, this is stuff that I did before. So set that up there. And then we want to add that interface in. Oh, that's already implemented, I think. Yeah. So we've got the interact here. So what I want to do is add a new input. So we're going to go into the third person input, actions, make a new input underscore interact. And that's bool, so that's all fine. And then we want to put the map in context, add a new one, select interact, make that E, or any button that you like. And then in here, we can start to do that. So input underscore interact, and then when we've done this, what we want to do is we want to get an area around the player, and if anything interactable is in that area, then you can interact with it. So what we want to do is add a volume around the player that'll sort of detect a wider area. So sphere collision, interact detect, and then make that a child of the mesh, and then increase the radius of this to something a bit larger. So 100 seems to be a good number for that. And then on a begin overlap, what we want to do is we want to start adding things to what's called an array. So on the variables, I want to add one, and I want to call this interact array. want to change this from a boolean to BP interact. So anything that is the BP interact or a child of the interact can be added to this array. And then in the top right, we want to change this from a single, so you should see that like single like capsule type look, to 9 squares. So that's an array. And what this does is allows us to just have a long list of loads of single references. So what we want to do is on this, get the array. If the other actor, so we want to cast to BP interact. So this will be anything that is this or a child of this. So BP, if it is the BP interact, then we can go through and we can add, drag off of the array, add unique. So we don't want to be able to add more than one of the same thing. So it'll be able to add multiple of, so if we had a button, for instance, of the interact, and we had multiple of them in the scene, it'll add each of them, because they'd be unique actors of that one blueprint type. But if we got some weird glitch where it could add 2 of the same exact blueprint, then it wouldn't do that. It'd only add unique variables, actors into that. What we then want to do is, when we end overlap, we want to remove that reference there. So if I copy and paste this, take that, and then remove item. So what we've got here, we've got a reference of things that are around the player that the player can interact with, and that's only interactable when it's this blueprint interact or a child of that. I'm going to show how to make children very soon. But what we want to do is when we press E, so when we do the input interact on started, we want to do a for each loop. So, and then we can link up this array. So for every item that we are near, we want to trigger the interact event. So and then trigger that there. So what we should hopefully see when I put this interact in here is that hello is said. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a child and I'm going to add a mesh into it just so we can see what that actually looks like. So on this BP interact, right click and create child blueprint class. What I'm then going to call this is take off the child and put button in there. So it's BP underscore interact underscore button. Open this up and it'll have all of the stuff that's in this parent, but we can add additional things into it. So I'm going to add a mesh into here, which is just a cube. And then if I link that up there, if I go near to this and I press E, you can see hello in the top left. If I walk away from it, it's not going to say hello. So this is a very quick way for us to be able to interact with a lot of different things, as long as it's a child of that blueprint interact there. So I can add multiple buttons in here. If I walk close to all of them, so if I walk to this central one, you should see 3 hellos pop up on the top left. There we are. So what we've got there is that linking up there. So I know that works now, so I can get rid of that. What I then want to do is add the interact here. So the event interact. And then I want to be able to reference that moving platform. So the way I'm going to do that is in this button, I'm going to add a reference and I'm going to call this platform ref. And I want to rename, change the variable type from Boolean to the specific moving platform blueprint that I've got. So I want the locked one. I want to make this a reference to that object, and I want to make it public. So I want to do that closed eye icon to an open eye. And then what that'll do is allow me to reference that platform that I'm going to place in now. So if I set up this how I want it, so that should be fine there. If I then look onto this button, on the platform reference, do this drop down, and then I can see that this is the one there. So I can check that by clicking on here. Once I've set it, click on this middle icon, so the cursor with the box around it. It sort of zooms into what it's selected, so you can double check to make sure things are referenced correctly. So what will that will then allow us to do is, from this reference, trigger that. That's the wrong one. Trigger this play custom event. So if I do this and I search play, it calls the function. There's certain things, so play seem to be a little bit too simple if you make it, and there's a lot of different things that you can select from. Usually it'll select the most sensible one of it, but it might be that you call it sort of enable platform, and then it's a little bit more specific, and you might not get confused. But for now, this seems to be fine. So so by default, this platform's not moving. If I go up to this button and I press E, it'll start to move then, and it should keep moving. And that'll be that. What you could do is also have a sort of flip-flop option. So in this platform here, we could do the play, but we could do a flip-flop. So what this will do is it'll flip between the A and the B. So we could do sort of stop. So when you play it, when you press E the first time, it'll play it. When you press E the second time, it'll stop. So I can show you that now. So it'll stop it where it is, and then when you press it again, it'll play it. You could have some sort of function of that if you want to stop. Maybe there's AI that are moving and you want to stop certain AI from getting into somewhere, so you could cut something off but then enable it when friendly AI are walking towards it. That could be an application of that. Another thing that you could do is have a sort of set the material to showcase if something is enabled or not. So a way to quickly do that would be if I just set up a very quick test material. And all that's fine. If I set that to red. So I won't fiddle with it looking nice. I'll just make it function. And then if I do a test 2. So the name of this is just very quick, just so I can get the point across. You'd obviously want to rename it something, so the green would likely be enabled, red would be disabled. And then from this, when you press E on the button, you could then flip-flop between green and red. So flip-flop, set material. So then by default you could have it where it's enabled, so it would be the test 2, and then set the material of it once it's disabled again to test red. Set the button to the red test, so it's by default disabled. Then when you go up to it, when you enable it, it turns green, and when you disable it, it turns red again, just so you got a bit of a visual of it being on or off. So this was kind of a good way to cover sort of locking things, but also how blueprints can interact with each other. So it is a complex system, but once you get to understand it and know how to use it, it becomes quite a powerful tool.